I'm David Glass, Mayor of Petaluma, and we're out in the south part of Sonoma County off Lakeville Highway. And we're going to get another story today about the history of the Petaluma Gap and wine in this agricultural community and when wine first came here. Let's welcome to the program, first of all, from the California Wine Museum. It's nice to have with us Jim McCormick. Jim, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Glad to.
Al Marcucci. Thank you, Al, for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Thank you for coming up and spending the time with me. I appreciate it. My father's uncles came to this country in 1900, and they settled in this area.
And then the Raffaele brothers, they actually are blood relatives of yours?
Yes. They were my great uncles. Three of them came. They liked the old country ways. My ancestors from the northern part of Italy. And they always said that this area around here reminds them of the northern part of, they came from the province of Lucca. And so they, that's why that's why a lot of the dairies are Swiss, Italian, and Portuguese. It reminded them a lot of the climate and the land in Portugal and Italy and Switzerland. And there were 3 ranches here in a row. And when it came time to sell one of them, they bought it from a man named Pete Hanna. They bought this one because it's the one that had the 25 acres of vineyard on it. And they had the vineyard at the small winery. They milked a few cows and had a few sheep, grew their own hay for the cows.
So Pete Hanna.
Yeah. He bought the property, I think from Hardin maybe, and he was like a speculator. He owned this property, the Henning Ranch behind us here, and the next ranch over, the George Gambonini's ranch. And the Raffaele brothers rented one at a time, and then when it came time to sell them, they picked this one. They bought this one from Pete Hanna.
I got a note here that says he shot a clock in San Francisco.
Yes. No, Petaluma.
Okay, tell us about that.
The Raffaele brothers shipped 3 barrels of wine. I don't know if they're 25 or 50-gallon barrels to San Francisco. Took them up here to the railroad depot. The Railroad Express would take them to San Francisco. Only 2 barrels made it to San Francisco. My father's uncle went up to the railroad depot in Petaluma, where it is today, and said, I got an invoice here for 3 barrels and only 2 show. Well, we don't have time to talk to you now. And at the dinner table the night, they related the story to him. The next morning, he said, we're gonna hook up a buggy and we're gonna go to town. They went to town the next morning, and Pete Hanna always carried a sidearm. Went to the railroad depot, and he said, my friend here lost a barrel of wine, and you gave him a receipt for 3 and only 2 got to San Francisco. We don't have time to deal with you. He pulled out his gun and shot the clock. Now you have time. And the next morning, a wagon from Railroad Express brought the barrel back with the wine in it. Dad, I think 3,000 gallons of wine, in storage when Prohibition was coming into effect. And I guess you needed to dispose of it. So kind of funny story. San Francisco police came up and said that, we understand you have wine here, and we'd like to buy it from you. And they said, some night if you're sleeping, if you hear noises in the winery, don't get up. Just stay there in bed. The next morning you go out, all your wine tanks will be empty. Call your local sheriff and tell him you were robbed. And down the road at a particular spot, there'll be a rock with this envelope of cash under it. And so my father's uncle were, they were afraid, they were Italian immigrants. They weren't nationalized citizens, and they're afraid if something went wrong, they would get deported. So they just went and pulled the cork and drained 3,000 gallons of wine just down the ditch there. And then after Prohibition, maybe even during Prohibition, probably you know better than I do, could you still make wine for home use?
You were allowed to make 200 gallons per household.
What they did here, they did that up until about 1962, I think. Everybody had stills and Prohibition, but like I said, the Raffaele brothers were afraid they were going to get caught and get deported, and they liked the United States, and so they did everything legally. Back in those days, my father said, when he was a young man, he said, if you went to a restaurant or went to a bar and ordered a glass of wine, they would laugh at you. Wine was not the in drink. They would call you an Italian and all sorts of derogatory names for Italians. Regular people didn't drink wine. It wasn't the thing to do. It wasn't, the Italians, I remember I go to Italian houses for dinner, and they didn't have a bottle on the table. They had a jug on the floor. The wine was made in this building over here. That's where they did the fermenting. And then up underneath that other shed, I opened the door up this morning, you go up there and take a look, that was the cellar. It was kind of semi-subterranean. It was always cool up there. And they had the hand pump, and they would pump the wine with a little back and forth motion pump it from the lower winery up to the upper.
And then Donahue Landing.
Donahue Landings, I own that. My father and uncle bought it from the railroad, Northwestern Pacific Railroad, in the early 1940s. It consisted of about 35 acres. And still to this day, there's an old stable tender's house and the stable where they kept the stagecoach. Because the way the story goes, I guess Peter Donahue, had a problem with the city of Petaluma. They didn't want to let him do something he wanted to do, so he said, okay, fine, I'll make a settlement downriver and I'll starve you people out. And I guess there's 700 and some people living there at one time.
So he was going to starve people out. What was he going to do? Set up an embargo on the river?
He had steamer company. He would not go to Petaluma with the steamer. He stopped here. So if Petaluma wants something, then that's why there's a railroad down. There's a railroad all the way down along the river. And so if you're in Petaluma, if you want to go to San Francisco by schooner, you take the train from Petaluma to Donahue, get on the schooner or the riverboat, whatever it was, and go to San Francisco. If you came up from San Francisco, you want to go to Petaluma, you get off at Donahue, but Donahue would not bring his boats into Petaluma. And you get on the train. If you want to go to Sonoma, you take the stagecoach over Stage Gulch. My father remembered out on the Tules out there was a big wharf. And there's a turntable to turn the train engine around. Because this was the end of the line. Donahue was the end of the railroad line. The Native Sons erected a monument in their lower parking lot to Donahue and to Lakeville. That was the community of Lakeville. There was a post office there and blacksmith shop. The grandfather of the guy that runs Lakeville Garage, Rich Altenruther, grandfather was the blacksmith. And his wife, Armenia Altenruther, who was a Masherini from the Masherini property that you bought eventually to put where the sewer plant is now. And so Donahue Landings is whatever was left of it. I got 34 acres there. Just the house and the barn are slowly deteriorating. The only sign that I have in my possession is a Giuseppe Raffaelli bonded winery number 578.
So let's go take our explorations around the grounds here and see what we discover.
This is the barn where the wine was actually made. There's a lot more equipment in there at the time, but it's been disposed of over the time. But these two tanks are left, these two fermenting tanks. There, as you can see on them, this one here is 1,463 gallons. That one there is 1,583 gallons. And the wine was made here, fermented here, and then there is a hand pump, a back and forth type hand pump that they put outside the wall there. There is a hole through the wall there that I've covered up to keep the birds out. And they'd run the hoses through there and they'd pump it up to the cellar up above where we're going to go next. And what they did, the Foster Ranch down here had a lot of employees. And they paid these people $1 a day. And they gave them 3 meals, mainly boiled sheep and boiled potatoes, because that was what they grew. So on Sundays, a lot of them a lot of them were Italian immigrants. They made friends with the Raffaelli brothers, so they'd come up here, and my grandmother would cook big Italian meals for them. So they'd come up here and spend their day off on Sundays up here. And my father, I said what they'd do, that if they wanted to man the hand pump for a while, they'd give them a jug of wine when they went home. And so they'd sit there and pump for an hour or two, and they'd give them a gallon of wine, and that'd be they'd take it back to their bunkhouse, and that'd be their wine for the week. And so the wine was transported from here up to there, pumped up there, and then up there, that's what's put into smaller barrels and eventually bottled. Most of the wine they sold here, I think even when the winery was open, was not bottled. It was all, the smallest container is probably a gallon jug. I mean, they didn't do the small quart bottles or 750 milliliters or whatever. But it was all gallon jugs.